Hello and welcome to the webinar. This is a manufacturing industry public policy webinar brought to you by One Voice for Manufacturing, the joint advocacy organization between the National Tooling and Machining Association and the Precision Metal Forming Association. I'm Caitlin Sickles with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. On the webinar today, you'll also hear from Paul Nathanson at Bracewell and from Omar Nashashibi at Inside Beltway. Inside Beltway does the on-the-ground lobbying and advocacy work for One Voice here in Washington, D.C., and PRG does the public affairs and strategic communications work for One Voice. Today's webinar will cover a lot of ground. We were talking in the practice session that this might be a record for folks who regularly tune into this webinar on sheer volume of content, volume of slides. But fear not, Omar will cover as much as he can in the amount of time with a reasonably able assist by Paul and me. And then you can get the rest of the content on the onevoiceinfo.org website. You can also get a recording of the webinar there, recording of previous webinars, and you can get content through PMA and NTMA as well. Omar, where on earth are you planning to begin with this list?
I think we're going to work next month to get this back down to a manageable size. But again, it's not the messenger, folks. There's just a lot that's coming out of Washington, so please bear with us. All right, let's start quickly on Capitol Hill. The federal government, for those of you in the defense world and care about your parks being open, that does not look like we're going to have a government shutdown heading into the election. The Senate, before they left for August break, did pass a continuing resolution that funds the federal government at existing levels beyond the September 30th deadline and to December the 11th. The House is coming back next week and is expected, after some back and forth, to likely take up what the Senate sent their way. That will, again, prevent a government shutdown. It will extend government spending on virtually all programs at existing fiscal year 2026 levels, and that will continue and bridge them past the election, which is what everybody needed to get done there. So robust lame duck is what we're expecting. Lame duck is what we refer to as after the election is over, but that continuing resolution, or CR, is likely to be signed by the president. Again, there might be some back and forth, some last minute fireworks, but it seems that they are going to get this one finished there. On the regulations, following up from last month, we did want to reference the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification requirements for defense contractors. Did want to remind that last month, on July 13th, the Pentagon put out a notice that they were suspending Phase 2, which is the third-party assessment organization requirements. Right now, you are still required to go through all of the Phase 1 contract cybersecurity duties. Those remain in effect during the Phase 2 pause. The self-assessment also remains in effect at this point. Sometime possibly next month, we might see a report be completed. Unclear if they'll release it on the CMMC, and receiving a lot of input on that. We know NTMA and PMA did file comments, raising just concern overall on how some perceive the CMMC's a paperwork requirement and check in the box requirement for the primes rather than true cybersecurity, and a number of other groups that did similar comments as well. Outside of that space, wanted to also put out that we do have some IRS guidance that came out recently on the family medical leave credit that came out, excuse me, on 45S of the IRS code. Specifically on August 5th, the IRS guidance on a permanent 45S credit this is for employers. So that's what, from this slide, get this to the HR folks, your CFO folks, your accounting people, with regards to the FMLA credit being made permanent under 45S. They'll understand what that means. There are some proposed changes in here that would have some comments due by October the 16th, but generally they're getting some additional guidance on this with regards to the 12.5% to 25% of wages for up to 12 weeks of qualifying leave being eligible for that credit. That's something to see the link below to make sure you're not missing out on that, as there's certainly going to be many of our businesses that might have some of eligibility there as well. On the wellness program guide, This might be geared a bit more towards some of our larger members that would have one of these programs that might have been put in place over the last, what we now, 15 years, 14 years from the ACA. That's in there. You can click on the link below to get a little bit more information on the employee benefit information related to wellness programs. On August 26th, just the other day, an FAQ was issued with regards to what is required in there, the materials in the program that must be disclosed. The notice also covers some reasonable alternative standard, must give contact information. You can go through this. Those of you that have a wellness program are aware of what much of this means and that have used it under the ACA in the past, just looking at some updates there and how that might be relevant. The next three slides are regional, just by definition, what OSHA does. They've got national emphasis programs. An emphasis program is where OSHA National directs their inspectors or their regional folks to do so, to look at a certain area. They've got it for heat, for mechanical presses, and also for certain chemicals. And here's a regional one for industrial trucks focused on Birmingham region and those areas that are affected. And it adds a couple of Arkansas and other areas you can tell at the bottom for Nashville Federal Office area, where they're going to do some outreach initiatives that'll include letters to employers, training sessions, possible partnerships, but enforcement activities will certainly include reviewing powered industrial truck operations on all inspections. So if you are in this region and you have an OSHA inspector come in, this will tell you that on industrial trucks is going to be one of their areas of emphasis there. Similarly, this is now for the same region as well. This is a noise hazard regional emphasis renewal. That means, again, on August 1st, they're going to make sure that in certain industries, motor vehicle parts, also 332, that'll cover machine shops, because you're 332.710, and stamping, non-automotive are covered there, but then the motor vehicle parts will cover the other auto stampers. So this one for that region on noise. And then lastly, coming out of, this is the Dallas handles this one for the Dallas region down below, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Texas. This is just for plastic and rubber products manufacturing, and some others also dealing with noise. So again, focuses on additional areas where you'll see OSHA emphasis there. Some of us within the that are active within the associations on the advocacy side, we've been discussing some of the defense industrial base work and engagement with the Pentagon and other stakeholders here in Washington. This is a new action that was just floated this week. It's a partnership between the Small Business Administration and the Pentagon to create what they call Smaller War Plants Commission, and that based on a World War II era SBA predecessor that was looking to build the defense industrial base by helping small businesses secure financing, government contracts, and technical assistance towards military production. And this newly established Smaller War Plants Commission would serve effectively as the government's coordinating body to expand the DIB, that's the Defense Industrial Base, with connections to small businesses. Obviously, they're looking at access to capacity, but usually capital is where SBA gets most involved, and they want to support capacity related to munitions and their components, drones, and one-way attack systems, castings and forgings, and other shipbuildings and repair components that are out there. So just note that this is going out there. Loan guarantees are increasing in 90% federal loan guarantee through the previously discussed Made in America loan program. They also have within there, they want to map the industrial base using the Civil Reserve Manufacturing Network. This is something that we've been talking to this and previous administrations, going back to COVID, about mapping the industrial base. And now the effort's getting a little bit more focused here as well, obviously due to events over the last 6 months. A quick summary of where they're looking at in terms of the focus here, again, on loan guarantees and trying to map the network and getting into certain areas where they feel that they can expand the defense industrial base, which we're going to talk about with the size standard maneuver that they're also pursuing as well. To that effect, though, we've seen the Small Business Administration, former senator from Georgia, Kelly Loeffler, she's the SBA administrator now for the second Trump administration. She's been making the rounds. She's flying all over the country. She's been in some of your shops. We've heard back from good, positive interactions. And then a lot of the regional people are going out into manufacturing plants and communities the ways that I haven't seen them do before to get more hands-on experience. They're now doing different workforce expos and coordinations with the Pentagon and around areas around the country. This is an example of what they did with OpenAI. This just occurred a couple of days ago in Coconut Creek, Florida, with regards to Department of Labor and find good paying apprenticeship jobs and connecting with manufacturing pipeline for local manufacturers. That was the first ever initiative there. This is also an SBA initiative for manufacturing training grants. On the next slide, I'll show you example of 6 of the 11 schools that were awarded money that are, and you're going to see in here, they're very much doing a lot of the activities that you all are doing with industry recognized credentials and training. Small Business Administration awarded those $50 million on the America's E2G program. That's where they're trying to empower to grow and really trying to push small businesses to further expand their capability. So awards are $1.5 million or so to $5 million. They're going to community colleges that are and other entities that are then going to be eligible to provide these services to businesses such as yours. There's Lehigh Carbon Community College, for example, for small, medium-sized manufacturers to cover advanced manufacturing in those areas, smart manufacturing. In the mid-state, the one up in central Wisconsin, they've got manufacturing engineering, advanced manufacturing, certificate pathways. There's a number of things that are happening there on the CNC side. Maine has some there, so does outside of Flint. So that's a couple of counties in Michigan have CNC machining going to be eligible there. Just encourage you all at Nassau and Long Island. There's a lot of defense work happening and a lot of shipbuilding happening there. And on the western side of Arizona, we're just some of the examples among others. I encourage you to take a look at the link there and work with your contacts at NTMA and PMA at each of their organizations there to try to help you get in there if you don't already have a connect as well. A few other things just on tribal colleges for those that might be in some of those nearby areas, that there's also going to be additional manufacturing grants that are going to some of those spaces there as well. Lastly, on the SBA side, SBA announced a first prize competition of up to $20 million for capital, $6 million each for tooling, casting, forging, rare earths, advanced metals, and then also for advanced materials, energy systems, and others. So additional dollar opportunities that they're putting out there. Our proposals were due today, but again, we'll see where they end up and how they're able to push these. On to a big tax issue on which we lobbied last year successfully to make permanent the Section 163J for your business interest deductions. And on that, there's an FAQ put out there. If about 10 to 15% of our members have used and take advantage of 163J. So if you're one of them, just take a look at the FAQ. There's a number of different clarifying points that are more just to give you more clarity. Send this on to whoever your CFO or is doing your CPA and simply say, if we're doing 163J, this was just published about 10 days ago. IRS overtime deduction. This is again the one where many of your employees have come to say that this is helpful. Reminder, this allows you to deduct the half on the time and a half, not the entire time and a half for those that are working on qualified overtime. Again, the FAQ has been released. This one, get it to your HR folks, shift managers, and of course your CFOs and CPAs to make sure you're conforming. And because you're getting the questions from your employees, they're not looking up these FAQs. So just make sure someone is getting it right in your shops if they're not already. And this is just a preview of things to come on EPA that we'll discuss here in the coming months more. We'll have one of my colleagues, Christian Richter, on in a few months to get into what's happening at the EPA. But this is an example of ozone redesignation areas effective backwards to June 29th in the Cleveland area. This is where you have National Ambient Air Qualities, NAAQS standards that are put out where the government puts in place. Then the states have to put a plan together how they're going to meet that, including potentially modifying economic expansion and manufacturing activity in those regions. So a couple of changes in Detroit pending, and then Cleveland already took place there as well. On size standards, we are not going to go through 10 slides here. The point is to flag this for you all of what's potentially coming and give you a little bit of background of the Small Business Administration with comments due on September the 21st. One Voice is likely to file comments in this space. The Small Business Administration since 1997 has done size standards. Excuse me, not since then. They've done small business contracting set aside since 1997. They increasing it rather from 20% to 23%. They have since then, going back to the Korean War, put in different size standards and how they measure what defines a small business. For those that are in retail services, typically it's going to be a revenue-based size standard. That's how they'll count whether or not you're a small business. For you manufacturers, those are your NAICS 332, 333. You're almost always, in the case of an SBA size standard in this event, are going to be done based on a head count. Your full-time equivalent employees, it's not based on EIN. So those of you that have multiple shops, if they're your controlled entity, that's how they're going to deem it, 50% or more control. Usually, you're all going to be counted together. What the SBA does with these numbers, if you are designated as a small business, then there's small business contracts that are set aside for you. Again, that's what the 23% of all government contracting is supposed to go to small businesses and flowing down through you. That's how the definition is important. The definition varies. In the manufacturing, it's typically based, again, it is based on the head count, which will run maybe at 500 employees, sometimes 750, often exceed 1,000, and can go over to 1,250 in some cases as well. The Small Business Administration is proposing to increase that size threshold, and we'll give you a few examples. For example, machine shops, which will cover a lot of the NTMA members, they're looking to propose to increase your headcount size standard from 500 employees to 1,900. For you stampers, they're looking to also increase that number significantly. But for the automotive stamping, it's going to take it up from about 1,000 right now to 3,500. For you non-auto stampers, we'll give you those numbers as well. But you're seeing how those numbers are doubling, more than doubling, they're tripling in some cases, which would, under the proposal, make about 115,000 more businesses eligible as a small business for those contracts. For those current businesses within the existing government contracting supply chain, SAM.gov, et cetera, there's 37,000 new contractors that already have $71 billion in contracts. They've got about 114,000 contracts. They'd now be considered small businesses and would be competing against companies that have 50, 60, 100, 400 employees. And so they're also looking to replace the over 1,000 industry-specific six-digit NAICS standards for purposes of size standards and start lumping some together. And we'll give you some examples on that. But here's how some of it, at least the summary page, starts to look like on what the SBA is proposing. If you are in the defense industry, this is an area of concern for you, or of interest rather. If you have small business contracts, if you are small business loans as well, some of the 7A, I believe, disaster not usually. States typically in their grants are going to do a monetary size standard, so that may not directly be linked here. So it is a defense issue, but you can see how they're looking to increase some of these numbers pretty significantly and taking it up again in the instance of machine shops from 500 up to 1,900 there as well. For those that are doing machine tools and dies, that's going to go from 500 up to 1,800. Here's the exact chart to give you an idea, and then how they would consolidate your NAICS as you know it, North American Industrial Classification Systems on the far left. You wouldn't lose your NAICS for everything just for this exercise. You'd be grouped into a different 4 or 5 different NAICS codes, as you can see in some of those there. There's copper, custom roll forming, you can come metal tanks. You're getting the sense of what they're doing with a number of these. If you're in defense space, small ordnance, ammunition, except small arms, that's 1,500. That one stays the same, but the small arms ordnance and ordnance manufacturing again goes from 1,000 to 1,500, among with several others that are on here as well. As the list goes, there's the machine tool that takes it from 500 to 1,800, cutting tools as well, up to 1,800s for the dies, mold builders. And then finally, on the last two, you'll get a sense of just where they are on automotive as well. So those numbers seem to go up and pretty significantly. There's the automotive stamping in there as well, going from 1,000 to 3,500. So we just want to flag that for you, those that are involved in government contracting, something to flag. This is a proposal at this point. It is not confirmed, but it is something that they are potentially looking to move forward with. On to trade, which is obviously the topic of most interest. We will start with the most timely of them, which is Canada and the United States, and the back and forth on where we are. A quick reminder, last month's webinar, we previewed the President's proclamation titled Section 338 under the Trade Act of 1930, Smoot-Hawley. That's where the President was allowed to impose up to a 50% tariff on imports from a country due to discriminating against U.S. commerce. The President did so, and those tariffs took effect on Saturday, August the 22nd at 12:01 a.m. Eastern. So this is part speculation, and welcome, Caitlin and Paul, jump in anytime you'd like. but because we've seen different analysis of which states in the United States are impacted the most. Bloomberg put one out here that says Ohio trades the most goods tariffed by Canada, and we're going to get to that, as not only did the U.S. impose tariffs, but Canada obviously retaliated. We do know that Michigan certainly is impacted quite a bit. A number of the southern states where heavy automotive are as well. And now you can see on the right-hand side where we rest with the exact tariff rates of Canada and the US and how those have kind of gone back and forth and the roller coaster that you're on with that. And they will continue to be in place until president decides for them not to be. This is the official notice that from the Cargo Systems Messaging Service that came out just hours before. Won't waste everyone's time with how this all collapsed, but effectively, this seemed like they were heading towards a deal into Friday night, and then around 10:30 or so, there was a notice that came saying tariffs were about to take effect in an hour and a half. And that's pretty typical in the last several months with things just coming together or not coming together, as you will. So this is the official notice for those of you that need to see your HTS and Chapter 9903s, and that's where you'll see the duty headings down at the bottom. The tariffs did take effect on August 22nd at 550%. They cover 5% of all imports coming in from Canada, or roughly $20 billion. They did it under 3 different proclamations, addressing the grievances the U.S. has related to alcohol, dairy, and automotive. They do not exempt USMCA qualifying goods. So if you have a product that is among the 554 goods that's listed on this tariff list, then you are subject to the tariff unless it's also on a 232 list. And I'm going to pause and walk people through this because we've heard quite a bit saying, well, now he's tariffing auto parts coming in from Canada. The answer is no. He's not doing that. There's one Chapter 87 line on the HTS list out of all 554. That's automotive, and it's for motorcycles and mopeds over 800 cc's. That is, they have not imposed tariffs on automotive parts. There might be some products that are used to manufacture automotive, but on the metal side, at least, they have not. There's going to be some textiles, yes, possibly some seats, some other assemblies that could fall in there, but it is most of those are already going to be on a 232 list potentially anyway. So the simplest way to think of this list that the US created is you have to be on it in order to have the tariffs of 50% apply. Again, there's 554 unique HTS codes at the 8-digit level that are on here. Do not assume the title applies to the contents of the tariffs. So for example, on the alcohol dispute, it's not 63 codes related to imports of Canadian alcohol. It's broader than that. Same with the motor vehicle dispute list. It's not just automotive related issues. It's broader than that. So if you are importing something from Canada that is not on the 232 list, because if it's on a 232, you don't need to bother with this one as much because the 232 supersedes everything else. You do want to check this out. You're going to be able to get that full list again from the CSMS, go all the way down to the bottom. There's going to be a link to a Microsoft Word document. It's safe to open. Even if it doesn't say .gov in there, that's the official government document that Customs uses for there to give you a sense of where some of this falls. If you are doing some nuclear work, yes, under Chapter 84, there might be some components in there. If you're doing, say, metal mountings and fittings and brackets for furniture under base metals, Chapter 83, those are going to be subject to tariffs coming in from Canada in the United States. So there is some furniture exposure. There's some areas here. And again, it totals about $20 billion worth of goods. There are some exclusions, again, to factor in. The 232 products, the way you would write that up is a 9903.03.15. That's how Customs know that it's a 232 product, that you would put that in there as well. But again, just to reiterate, USMCA eligibility does not remove the 338 duties of 50% on Canada, and that's something to keep. Now, Canada was obviously expected to respond. We've got elections coming up, obviously in the midterm elections in the US. We have elections in Canada coming up at the provincial level, and with all this going on. So Canada has retaliated, or announced a retaliation rather, effective September 8th. The US tariffs on Canadian imports are already in effect. Those are now in there at 50% as of Saturday. We can expect changes to that potentially, especially if after September 8th, the Canadians do move forward. The Canadians have done a couple of things. On Monday, they put out a list that had 874, I think, items that were on it. Then on Wednesday, they removed a number of goods, primarily removing a number of seafood items, but then they added on copper wire and another category that's in there. So now they're hovering at, I think around 629 is if you click that link down below. So again, this is an inclusive list. It's not default. It's not everything. So it was initially a $20 billion list. It's now dropped since they got rid of a bunch of seafood on there. But if you are now shipping a product to Canada, you should not assume there's a tariff of 15, 25, or 50, but you are going to want to click that link below with your HTS code. Again, it's Canadian, so everything they put in there on the dollar amounts is Canadian. The HTS codes are Canadian, so you're going to need to make sure you're not getting those conversions incorrect. A number of metal derivatives do face the 25% tariffs, but there are molds and stamping dies that are in there at 15%. I'll get to on the next slide. So this will give you an example of articles from the United States that are going up to Canada. And even if they are USMCA qualifying, the tariff does still apply. This is what you've heard most about in the media, where they are doubling the tariffs from 25% to 50% on those 232 equivalent covered products that are out there. But this is the one that we wanted to flag for those of you that might be bringing in any tooling from Canada, and these would now be subject to a 15%. These are the ones that you're going to want to look at. Right here, the 8207s. Many of you are either making this, so you might be competing with Canada, and that way you might want to tell your customers that bringing it from Canada is at a 15% rate, and that's the area that you want to focus on with some of these other areas. A handful of our members that might be buying molds, there's some coming in from Canada, those are now going to be at a 15% rate, excuse me, coming in from the United States, going up there that might be making them and shipping them up there to a customer that might be doing some work, say automotive up there. Those are going to be still subject to that 15% going in. So note that, keep in mind, there's already been changes. This has not gone into effect, and it's not a one tariff fits all for the Canadians. It's 15, it's 25, and then it's 50% depending on the HTS code. So that you're definitely going to need to check the details on it as well. Just to round out that conversation on North America here, on where we are on Mexico. Mexico's been a bit quieter. They've been in town at least once a week, or at least they're saying they're having conversations at least once a week. But sources are saying they're pretty much they're going over to across from the White House to the USTR pretty regularly on conversations here as well. They don't have a set date based on a call we had on Tuesday afternoon, but we're still hearing sometime around the 14th, 15th, 16th, the mid-September timeframe. The Mexican delegation should come up to the U.S. for a fourth round of discussions there, and it's going to obviously focus again on aluminum and steel, on rules of origin. We're hearing that the U.S. has tabled also potential proposals in other areas to expand rules of origin to other industries and sectors beyond automotive. Happy to get into some of that offline for those that are interested. Reach out to Christy or Jenny or myself or Paul or Caitlin. Happy to fill you in there. But reminder, USMCA remains in force. We get too many questions of what did USMCA expire on July 1st? No, it did not. That is not how this works. USMCA is still in force. Negotiations honestly are probably not going to be done by the end of the year, as some on the Hill were hoping at the beginning of the summer. At this stage, we're hearing they're likely going to drift into 2027, certainly unless things de-escalate now. If the Canadians move forward on September 8th, the trade community, those of us in the private sector, are expecting that the Trump administration might initiate a proclamation saying that January 1 will be the date that they impose a 50% tariff on autos and parts, and probably and maybe even have a tariff list item that goes out with that. So there's going to be a back and forth if that escalates. However, yesterday things seemed to soften a little bit, at least on the French language labeling issue for Quebec requirements for goods going in there. So hopefully some progress, some softening. Greer certainly, in a CNBC interview on Monday, was trying to send some signals to tone things down a little bit. But Paul, I don't know kind of what your thoughts there are.
Yeah, I mean, we had some toning down with Greer's appearance, and the Canadians saying that they're going to adjust some of these tariffs, but then we had the executive order renaming Lake Ontario, which doesn't help the situation. So, but I agree that I think both sides are trying to get some kind of off ramp, and that's why we're looking at tariffs being imposed, additional tariffs on January 1st, but it's a rocky road, and you just have to keep a close eye on what's going to happen as far as these negotiations, or hopefully there will be serious negotiations starting up again.
Yeah, the principals just need to give staff some room, I think is kind of where you're going with that. And that just hasn't happened between Doug Ford and Trump and other things in the back and forth. So hopefully the principals can kind of tone it down a bit and the people that do this for a living can get back to work and get this done before some consequences come out that are going to be difficult for both folks, for us at least around November. So jumping into a couple of things we want to come back to 232s. And we'll get ready to wrap up here in about 6, 7 minutes or so. On Defense Production Act, we've been discussing this off and on now for the last few years, since COVID in particular, but there's now a DPA, Defense Production Act, that deals with tungsten and battery scrap. This follows some additional critical mineral export controls that were also put in place. I believe it was towards the end of July that we covered last month. And under that interpretation would have also covered tungsten and aluminum, but this is a bit more specific. And what this does is the Commerce Department issued a defense production allocation order for tungsten waste and scrap. And again, this is important for the tungsten carbide that goes in for the tool making and area. So there's specific HTS code in here, and it will bar the export without a waiver of the waste and scrap. So that way it can stay here domestically and get recycled, reused, and then remade. So the sellers must allocate 100% of sales to U.S. buyers. On that, it's going to apply to both rated and unrated orders. Foreign sales required a BIS approval, Bureau of Industry Security approval through all that process. And so this is for a full 12 months that they're going to require this. There are comments due on November 4th. We'll discuss that here on our internal side with our members, whether or not they want us to put in some comments. Assume we do. We've already spoken to the Commerce Department in April and since, as well with some other entities, about some of the challenges with tungsten and their over-reliance on China, that this is there. So those of you that know this issue know it. Please weigh in. And if we are going to file comments, please reach out and we can incorporate that as well. A couple of inclusions, and a couple, 14 inclusions. Just want to flag again what especially Paul has mentioned in the past as part of his work for CAMU. When the Trump administration last year created a tariff inclusion process so you can add more products to the steel, aluminum, and copper list, at least steel, aluminum, they put forward a public process where you could petition, folks could then respond and oppose the inclusion or support the inclusion. And now they've driven that process underground. There isn't a public process. On August 6th, Commerce proposed 14 new HTS codes that it was going to add to the tariff rate of 25, 15, 25, or 50% on imports of steel, aluminum, or copper derivatives. There wasn't a public input request process. What they're now is they're putting it out to the public. Comment period closed last night at midnight, saying, do you support or oppose the inclusion of some of these products? So this shows you that they are looking to continue to add more parts to the tariffs for steel and aluminum without even having that 3 times a year process that they had set up in the previous year. So indications are from folks with whom we're having conversations is, depending on how long this one round takes, there might be another tariff inclusion announcement for the 232s that comes later in the fall. But this gives you an example of some of those items that are on here. And you might have some components that are made that go in here, or you might be buying some of these, or your customers might, that these are now subject to either the 15, 25, or 55.0% tariff rate there as well. This is the long expected and anticipated Section 232 tariffs on drones and parts. We've been expecting it for some time. They're staging these in, and it's different types of drones have different, and the parts have different times for which their tariffs will take effect. Some of them are going to start at 12:01 on September 3rd next week. Others are going to be in at a 25% that are going to come in on February the 9th. So it really just matters if you're in this space, and increasingly we're going to have more and more members that are for the unmanned aircraft system components, and they're going to be a specific list, Annex 3, and you can see some of those parts and examples that are on there. So next week you're looking at 100% on the large and the thermal imaging drone imports, then on docking stations and components, and then also other covered drones, but then the components, those are going to start coming into next year. So those of you that are in this space or looking to be in this space, Now one might want to argue is a good time to be able to go to potential customers and advertise the potential tariffs that are coming there for use. Those that are specifically in this space, here are the HTS codes that you would need to look at on the annexes to which we reference. So please, on your own, you can click on a 1.2 or Annex 3, and you'll get a better sense of when it's imported for the use of drones. So just because you're making a part does not mean it's going to be covered. Remember, it's going to be this. When imported for use in drones, that's going to be your key, and you're going to see more and more of that from the Commerce Department, is our understanding that they're going to get very specific to putting a tariff, part of that inclusion. They're not going to open everything up. They're just going to say yes for that part if it's being used for aviation, for drones, for autos, et cetera. And that's increasingly the strategy that we're hearing that they're going to employ on there as well. Exiting the tariff realm, and trying to wrap up here on trade sections. For those of you that are bringing in products from China, just note there's some additions for the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. This is a law that's been around for a few years now. They added 43 companies. The reason we're taking time to include this is if you are bringing in aluminum or carbon or titanium or copper or some other items that are coming in from the Xinjiang region in China, please make sure that you are checking the list, because they are now, they should be blocked, and there could be serious consequences if those are found within the supply chain as well. So we just wanted to list a couple of those companies just to flag that for you as well. And then finally, every month we'll try to give you updates on where things stand on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act tariffs. These are the ones Supreme Court struck down on February the 20th, and where they are in that process. There's money going out. So if you have not started your process, now is the absolute time to do it. They've got, out of the $166 billion collected, the Treasury Department has been authorized to put out $106 billion. So they're moving pretty quickly here. But the biggest challenge they have, $1.7 billion. You have 22,000 refunds have still not sent because of an ACH enrollment issue from contract, another person we know. Their client recently reached out to them because they are having ACH issues. Do not have this problem. Do not lose your opportunity to get your money in. For those of you that have gone through final liquidation, known as Phase 3, there are delays there. The courts are fully aware of this process and this not being rolled out yet. So Phase 1 and 2 remain operational, but the court order reliquidation process, which the Trump administration is opposing, is continuing to take a little bit of time there, as is the tariff litigation, and would also, offer to put one more in here. I think since this, you did also have the other, I think the 301 case was also accepted. Paul, if you want to jump in here on that one, since we know litigation is going to kind of start moving its way through, not just on the 122s, but also on that forced labor on the 301 with Learning Resources too.
Yeah, so Learning Resources might sound familiar to you because that's the small toy company that's located outside of Chicago that was one of the companies and was the named litigant in the Supreme Court Learning Resources versus Trump, which led to the IEEPA tariffs ruled illegal, and this is why all this money is being refunded. Well, the owner of Learning Resources filed a similar lawsuit for the 301, and the courts have picked his. There were several cases filed, and the courts have picked his case, Learning Resources, as they call it the sample case. So you'll be hearing that the 301 case is going to be referred to as Learning Resources again. And I talked to him, or I've communicated with him, and he's getting ready for another media blitz, and like he does, Rick Woldenberg, and so we'll see what happens with that. But obviously there's a lot of different issues on 301 than there are on IEEPA. In that 301, in the 301 statute, obviously you can apply a tariff. The whole IEEPA, it came down to that the word tariff was not in the statute. So very different cases, but we'll see what happens.
Thanks. Paul, don't go too far, but I'm going to pause on this one for a second before I turn it back to you on steel pricing on the next slide. Two things we did not put in here in writing, but do want to put for those that are still with us on the 301s and 232s. The manufacturing excess capacity for that Section 301 investigation. Our understanding is we're going to see that shortly, as soon as possibly next week. I think many people have seen the Bloomberg report of they're looking at a 7.5% tariff on China. Well, we're also seeing that it may end up being a, say, 32 or 31% tariff with 24% suspended, and that's how they're going to end up getting down to a 7.5% tariff. So they're gonna announce on manufacturing excess capacity a higher rate on tariff on China. They'll suspend a portion of that, keep it down at 7.5%. That will stack on top of the forced labor 301 to give China a cumulative 20% in effect, which would equal what they had at IEEPA. And if you can follow that, Paul's got a prize for you. But where they are heading with this is stacking the 301s that Paul referenced on forced labor with the manufacturing excess capacity. We should potentially see those manufacturing excess capacities in the next week or two, especially since President Xi of China is going to come to the U.S. as of now, likely around September 24th. And the last item that we're just hearing but don't have in writing here is on industrial machinery, machine tools, and robotics. Sources have indicated that we were supposed to see that today, and today is still not over, and we might still see those tariffs. Rumors around Washington is that's a 15% potential rate on machine tools coming in from allies and non-allies alike. Again, if that does happen, we certainly will bring you that update on our next coming webinar. Sorry, Paul, back to you.
Just very quickly, this is our Coalition of American Metal Manufacturing Users chart that we've been keeping since 2018 on U.S. versus global steel prices, where we use a hot rolled steel price as a marker, and just you see the prices there in the U.S. compared to the EU. I want to point out the EU and China. The spread right now between the U.S. and China is $863, and between the U.S. and the EU is $444. If you go back 1 year ago, the spread with the China was only $509, and the spread with the EU was only $241. At the same time, not shown here is we keep track of the U.S. capacity, the domestic producers' capacity utilization rate. This is an important number for the government in that the original 2018 232 tariffs that continue today was based on trying to get the domestic capacity utilization for the domestic steel industry up to 80%. There's nothing magic about that number, but it was the number that was picked. Right now, it's at 78.2%. 1 year ago, it was at 78.6%. So pretty steady, not a lot of change. Thanks, Omar.
Yeah. Also, to that effect, if you are willing to give us information or at least speak to the media on aluminum, please reach out to Paul as well on that. There's also been a lot of talk on the Hill about the Midwestern Premium and how that effectively is being a proxy for the tariffs and incorporating the tariffs, whereas it should not, even for domestic purchases. And so trying to get the Commerce Department to look into that a bit more. But those of you that are experiencing issues there or getting no quotes on steel, please reach out to us on the advocacy side of things. Lastly, quickly, we're going to wrap here. Manufacturing growth, you've seen some expansions. Depends on how you look at it in certain areas. So we're just going to throw out some numbers there for you. The China trade surplus, though, of course, is hitting a new high in 2025. Looking at the amount of exports, that is still not slowing down from China, it looks like anytime soon, as they continue to push around the world and come in here. 2 slides here on copper, where they look at copper shipments are surging. For those of you that are in the copper world, this is not market speculation advice. This is for you thinking ahead. There are more tariffs that are coming, and there might be coming next year, and then there's tariff schedules for 2028. And that's where a lot of those that are playing around in markets are starting to work their way backwards, looking at hoarding, looking at what they might be doing on this stage. And that stockpile is real. Traders have been front running tariffs, tabbing, going through this and looking on that stock that they're bringing in. So again, start thinking this through in terms of what the supply chain, how that's going to react to next rounds of tariffs that the president has already announced. Not saying they'll take effect, but that is already having market moving measures. And for those of you that like to follow this, we did get an update on the monthly federal deficit increases that are on there as well. As always, you can stay connected with us in a multiple ways, not just this monthly webinar, but also through our podcast that we'll be picking up here, especially heading into the election season, which which is going to start officially right after Labor Day weekend. But with that, we're happy to take any questions and add any other thoughts that you all have would be welcome. Our next webinar is going to be on Friday, September 25th at noon Eastern, just because that will end up being the last Friday of the month, and that would be around the exact time that the President of China and our President are going to meet at the same time. So feel free to type in any questions that you might have. No, we've again covered quite a bit on a record number of slides, but again, there's always quite a bit to cover from this town. All right, seeing no questions come in. Thanks as always. Feel free to reach out to either NTMA, PMA, or ourselves at any time for more information, and we will connect with you again on September 25th at noon Eastern. Thank you all.